The first time I realized my son was trying to kill me, he was holding my hand and telling me he loved me. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in early October, the kind of soft New England day when the sunlight pours through tall windows and makes dust look like falling snow. I was sitting in the breakfast nook of my Connecticut mansion, the one my late husband Daniel and I had built nearly 30 years earlier. The tea in my porcelain cup had a faint, bitter aftertaste. Not strong enough to alarm me, just wrong. I remember looking at my son Marcus, who was standing across from me in his tailored navy suit, and thinking how handsome he still looked at 42. He smiled the same way he did when he was a boy, asking for a second cookie. "You really need to rest more, Mom," he said softly. "You've been looking tired." That word stayed with me, tired, because I hadn't just been tired. For months I had been dizzy, weak, forgetful. I would lose my train of thought mid-sentence. My hands sometimes trembled so badly I could barely hold a fork. At first, I blamed age. I was 68, after all, a widow, a grandmother, owner of a logistics company valued at over $32 million. People expected me to slow down, but deep down, something inside me kept whispering, "This isn't normal." Then came the night that changed everything. It was after a family dinner, the first one since Marcus married his wife, Lila, a sleek, beautiful woman 10 years younger than him. She had glossy black hair, eyes like polished stone, and a smile that never quite reached them. From the beginning, she treated me with an unsettling politeness, like a hotel guest pretending to respect the owner while secretly judging every piece of furniture. That evening, I had barely eaten half my Thanksgiving leftovers before my stomach twisted violently. I excused myself and rushed upstairs. By the time I reached the bathroom, my vision had already begun to blur. I collapsed onto the cold tile floor, the taste of metal flooding my mouth. And I remember thinking very clearly, this feels like poison. When I woke, I was in a hospital bed, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A doctor with tired eyes stood beside me. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore," he said carefully. "Have you been exposed to any heavy metals recently?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then said the words that shattered my world. "You have elevated levels of arsenic in your system. Not enough to be immediately fatal, but consistent with long-term exposure." Long-term exposure? The room went silent, except for the steady beep of a heart monitor. My mind raced through every possibility. Industrial contamination, water supply issues, accidental ingestion. But one thought kept rising above the rest, like something clawing its way to the surface. Someone had been giving it to me, slowly, deliberately. When Marcus and Lila arrived at the hospital, they looked appropriately shocked. Marcus squeezed my hand, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mom, how could this happen?" he asked. Lila stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, eyes scanning the room. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the folder in the doctor's hands, specifically the page labeled Estate Evaluation. Because 3 weeks earlier, at Marcus's insistence, I had agreed to review my will. He said it was practical, responsible, something wealthy families needed to do regularly. And now, lying in that hospital bed, my body weak and my mind suddenly razor sharp, I realized something terrifying. If I had died quietly within the next few months, everything would have gone to Marcus. Every dollar, every property, every share of Whitmore Logistics. No legal disputes, no delays, just a grieving son inheriting $32 million. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as Marcus leaned closer and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of everything." That was the moment I understood. He already was, and he wasn't trying to save me. He was waiting for me to die. But what Marcus and Lila didn't know was this. I wasn't as weak as they thought, and I had just enough strength left to make sure that if they wanted my fortune, they would have to survive me first. The hardest part about realizing your own child wants you dead is not the fear, it's the silence. Because once you know, you can never unknow. Every smile becomes suspicious. Every kind gesture feels rehearsed. Every word sounds like it has a second meaning hiding underneath. When I returned home from the hospital 2 weeks later, I made a decision that would save my life. I told no one what I suspected. Not the police, not my lawyer, not even my closest friend, Patricia Gomez, who had known me since college and now served as my company's chief financial officer. Instead, I pretended. I played the role of a fragile, confused old woman perfectly. I let Marcus move back into the mansion to help manage things. I allowed Lila to take over my meal planning. I even nodded along when they suggested hiring a private nurse, a sweet young woman named Dana, who never stayed long enough to notice patterns. And most importantly, I stopped drinking anything they prepared. Every cup of tea, every glass of juice, every bowl of soup they placed before me, I quietly disposed of later. Within weeks, my strength began to return. My hands stopped trembling. The fog in my mind lifted. My appetite came back like a forgotten friend. And with clarity came rage. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, remembering Marcus as a little boy, clutching my leg on his first day of kindergarten, remembering how I worked 3 jobs after Daniel died to build the company he now wanted to inherit without earning. How had we gotten here? The answer revealed itself one evening when I overheard them. I had come downstairs silently, intending to fetch a blanket. The living room lights were dim, and voices drifted from Marcus's office. Lila was speaking, her tone sharp. "You said it would be faster," she snapped. Marcus sighed. "It is working." The doctor confirmed the arsenic levels. "But she's not declining quickly enough," Lila said. "The longer she stays alive, the more risk we have." My heart pounded so loudly, I feared they would hear it. Marcus's voice dropped lower. "We just need a few more months. Once she signs the updated will transferring full operational control to me, it won't matter." Lila laughed softly. "I can't wait to get out of this mausoleum," she said. $32 million, Marcus. We'll be free. Free. The word echoed in my ears as I slipped back upstairs, my hands shaking, not with weakness this time, but with fury. That night, I made a second decision. I would not confront them. I would not expose them. I would do something far more devastating. I would let them believe they were winning, because nothing destroys a toxic family more completely than hope. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Harold Benton, a meticulous 70-year-old man who trusted me enough to ask no unnecessary questions. "I need to update my will," I told him calmly. "Of course," he said. "What changes would you like to make?" I looked out the window at Marcus walking through the garden, his arm wrapped around Lila's waist, and I smiled for the first time in months. "Oh, Harold," I said quietly, "I'm going to give them exactly what they think they want. But before I do, I need your help to make sure it destroys them." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Harold said slowly, "Eleanor, what exactly are you planning?" I leaned back in my chair, feeling stronger than I had in years. "I'm planning," I whispered, "to turn my own funeral into their worst nightmare. The first rule of surviving betrayal is this: never reveal how much you know. The second rule is even more important. Never let them see you getting stronger." For the next several weeks, I perfected the art of looking like a woman who was slowly fading away. I walked more slowly. I paused mid-sentence, as if struggling to remember simple words. I let my shoulders slump and allowed Marcus to steady me when we climbed the staircase. Sometimes, I even pretended to nap in the afternoons, so they would feel safe speaking freely. It worked better than I expected, because people who believe they are smarter than you always become careless, especially greedy people. One evening in late November, I sat in the sunroom, pretending to read, while Marcus and Lila spoke on the terrace just outside the sliding doors. The glass was slightly open, and their voices drifted inside with the cold air. "She's deteriorating," Marcus said quietly. "The lawyer agreed to come next week. We just need her to sign." Lila sounded impatient. "And the medical reports?" "I've already talked to the doctor," he replied. "He believes it's environmental exposure. There's no investigation." She let out a satisfied breath. "Good. Once we have the inheritance secured, we'll sell this mansion immediately." Sell this mansion? The words cut deeper than I expected. This house was not just property. It held 30 years of memories. Christmas mornings with Daniel, birthday parties for Marcus. The day I signed the first major contract that saved Whitmore Logistics from bankruptcy. And they spoke of it like it was just another asset to liquidate. But what struck me most wasn't their cruelty. It was their certainty. They truly believed they had already won. That certainty became my greatest weapon. Because while they were planning my death, I was planning their future. And it was going to be a future they would never escape. The following week, Harold Benton arrived with the revised documents. Marcus hovered nearby, pretending to be supportive. Lila brought tea, placing the delicate china cup carefully in front of me. I smiled weakly. "Thank you, dear," I said. I did not drink it. Harold cleared his throat and opened the folder. "As requested, Eleanor, this updated. Will transfers full controlling shares of Whitmore Logistics to your son, Marcus Whitmore, upon your passing," he said in a professional tone. Marcus tried to look solemn, but I saw the flash of triumph in his eyes. Lila's fingers tightened around the back of his chair. I picked up the pen, slowly, letting my hand tremble slightly for effect. "This is what you wanted, Marcus," I said softly. His voice was thick with fake emotion. "Mom, you don't have to do this." I smiled at him. "Oh, sweetheart," I said gently. "Everything I've ever done has been for you." And then I signed. The moment the ink touched paper, something shifted in the room. Marcus exhaled sharply, as if he had been holding his breath for months. Lila looked down quickly, but I caught the flicker of satisfaction in her expression. They thought it was over. They thought the last obstacle between them and $32 million had just disappeared. What they didn't know was that the document Harold handed me to sign was only part of the plan, because while they believed they were securing their inheritance, they had actually just agreed to something else entirely, something hidden in legal language, so precise, so devastating that even Marcus wouldn't recognize its true meaning until it was too late. After Harold left, Marcus leaned down and kissed my forehead. "You can finally rest now, Mom," he said. I looked up at him and felt something inside me settle into cold, unbreakable clarity. Yes, I thought, now the real work begins. Because the next step wasn't about survival anymore. It was about justice. And justice, I had learned, is never as simple as exposing the truth. Sometimes justice means letting people walk willingly into the trap they built for you. The day after I signed the will, Marcus and Lila celebrated. They didn't think I knew, but betrayal has a way of sharpening every sense you have. That evening, as I lay in bed, pretending to sleep, I heard laughter drifting up from the dining room. Not quiet conversation, not cautious whispers. Laughter, bright, relieved, victorious. I got up slowly and walked to the top of the staircase, staying hidden in the shadows. Below, the chandelier cast warm, golden light over the long dining table where Marcus and Lila sat with 2 glasses of champagne. "To us," Lila said, raising her glass. Marcus clinked his against hers. "To freedom." Freedom again. It seemed to be their favorite word. "Once she's gone, everything changes," Lila continued. "We'll move to California. Buy that oceanfront house we saw. No more pretending to care about her company or this depressing place." Marcus nodded. "I'll appoint a new board. Liquidate some assets. The company is worth more broken up anyway. I felt my nails dig into my palms. Whitmore Logistics was not just a business. It employed over 400 people. Families depended on it. Men and women who had worked beside me for decades trusted me to protect their livelihoods. And my own son planned to dismantle it for faster cash. In that moment, my revenge stopped being only personal. It became something larger. It became about protecting everything they were willing to destroy. That night, I called Patricia Gomez. She answered on the first ring. "Eleanor," she said, concern in her voice. "Are you all right?" "No," I replied quietly, "but I will be." There was a pause. Then she asked, "What do you need from me?" I took a deep breath. "I need you to prepare for an emergency succession protocol," I said. "And I need you to trust me completely, even if what I ask sounds extreme." Patricia did not hesitate. "You have my trust," she said firmly. "Always." Tears stung my eyes for the first time in months. Because betrayal may break your heart, but loyalty rebuilds it. Over the next several weeks, I quietly set the final pieces of my plan into motion. Patricia restructured company bylaws. Harold finalized additional legal clauses. A private investigator documented every suspicious transaction Marcus had made since moving back into the mansion. And I did something Marcus would never expect. I scheduled a family Christmas gathering, a large one, extended relatives, board members, legal representatives, even a retired judge who had once served on our company's advisory panel. Marcus was thrilled when he heard. "It will be nice for everyone to see you," he said warmly. Lila added, "It will reassure people that everything is stable." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what it will do." Because Christmas Eve was not just going to be a celebration. It was going to be a stage, and in front of everyone, they hoped to impress. Marcus and Lila were about to discover that the inheritance they believed they secured was actually the most carefully constructed trap of their lives. What they didn't know was this: I had already arranged for one final surprise, one that would reveal not only their betrayal, but a hidden truth about Marcus himself. A truth that would change everything he thought he knew about his future. And once that truth came out, no amount of money in the world would be able to save him. If you have ever planned a trap for someone you once loved, you will understand this strange, aching truth. Revenge is not a burst of rage. It is patience. It is discipline. It is learning to smile at the very people who broke your heart while quietly building the ground that will collapse beneath them. By early December, I had regained almost all my strength. The color had returned to my cheeks, and my hands were steady again. But to Marcus and Lila, I still appeared to be a fragile woman inching toward her final days. I let them keep believing that story. Every morning, Lila would bring me tea, her expression carefully arranged into a mask of concern. "You should drink it while it's warm," she would say gently. I would nod and lift the cup to my lips, letting it hover there just long enough for her to feel satisfied before setting it down again. What she didn't know was that I had already installed a tiny camera inside a decorative clock on the shelf above my desk. It captured everything, every time she entered my room, every time she poured something into my cup, every time she thought no one was watching. The footage was chilling. She never hesitated, never showed guilt. She would take a small vial from her pocket, unscrew the cap with practiced ease, and empty a nearly invisible powder into my tea before stirring it carefully. Once, she even hummed while doing it. I watched those recordings late at night, sitting alone in my study, feeling a strange mix of grief and cold determination. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not desperation. This was calculated murder, and Marcus knew. That truth became undeniable one afternoon when I overheard him speaking on the phone in his office. "Yes," he said quietly, pacing near the window. "The life insurance policy is already in place." My breath caught. Life insurance. I'm listed as sole beneficiary, he continued. Between that and the inheritance, everything will be secured. He paused, listening. Then he added something that made my stomach twist. No, there won't be an autopsy. She's old, declining, and her medical records already show heavy metal exposure. It'll be ruled natural causes. Natural causes. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. My own son wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was actively planning how to ensure no one would question it. That night, I called Harold Benton and asked him to come to the mansion immediately. When he arrived, I showed him the video footage. He watched silently, his face growing pale. When it ended, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Eleanor," he said slowly, "this is attempted murder." "Yes," I replied quietly, "and it's only the beginning." He looked at me with deep concern. "We should go to the police right now." I shook my head. "No," I said firmly. "Not yet." He frowned. Why? Because simple justice was no longer enough. If they were arrested immediately, they would face trial, possibly prison. But they would never truly understand the depth of what they had done. They would never feel the full weight of betrayal they had inflicted. And they would never face the consequences that mattered most to them, losing everything they believed they had already secured. "I want them to think they've won," I told Harold quietly. "Completely, without doubt." He studied me for a long moment. Then he asked, "What exactly are you planning?" I leaned forward, my voice calm and steady. "I'm planning to give them the inheritance," I said. His eyes widened slightly, but only after they agree to conditions they don't yet understand. He exhaled slowly. "Eleanor, this is dangerous." I met his gaze without hesitation. "So is trusting the wrong people," I said. Outside snow had begun to fall, covering the estate in a silent white blanket. Christmas was less than 3 weeks away, and when it arrived, Marcus and Lila would finally receive exactly what they had been waiting for. Just not in the way they imagined. Because what they didn't know was this: the inheritance they thought would set them free was actually designed to trap them forever. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in glittering lights and carefully rehearsed smiles. The mansion looked exactly the way it had when Daniel was alive. Garland draped along the staircase railing. A towering pine tree stood in the foyer, decorated with ornaments collected over 3 decades. Soft instrumental carols filled the air. To anyone walking through those doors, it appeared to be a warm, joyful family gathering. But beneath the polished surface, tension hummed like a live wire. Marcus had invited several board members from Whitmore Logistics. Lila had personally called extended relatives she barely tolerated. Even Patricia attended, maintaining her usual composed professionalism. And as planned, Harold Benton arrived carrying a leather briefcase. Behind him walked retired Judge Raymond Holloway, an 80-year-old man whose reputation for integrity was legendary. Marcus looked surprised when he saw them. "Mom," he said lightly, "this feels very formal for a holiday dinner." I smiled warmly. "Oh, sweetheart," I replied, "tonight is about family and closure." Lila's eyes flickered with curiosity. She sensed something unusual, but she couldn't yet see the shape of it. Dinner passed with polite conversation. I laughed at appropriate moments, accepted compliments on the decorations, and played my role perfectly. Then, after dessert, I stood slowly. "My dear family," I said, my voice steady but gentle, "thank you for being here tonight. At my age, one learns that time is precious, and I want to ensure everything is settled while I still can." The room fell silent. Marcus straightened in his chair. Lila leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. I nodded toward Harold. "Please," I said. "Go ahead." He opened his briefcase and removed several documents. As requested by Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, he announced, "We are here to finalize the transfer of her estate and controlling shares." A murmur passed through the room. Marcus's face flushed with excitement he struggled to hide. Lila's fingers tightened around his arm. Harold continued, The total estate value, including Whitmore Logistics, real estate holdings, and financial assets, is approximately $32 million. The number hung in the air like a promise. Then he said the words Marcus had been waiting to hear. Primary beneficiary, Marcus Whitmore. Marcus exhaled sharply, his eyes shining. But Harold did not stop speaking. However, he added calmly, as stipulated in the legally binding conditions Mrs. Whitmore has established, the inheritance is subject to a performance clause. Marcus frowned slightly. A what? Harold adjusted his glasses. In order to receive full ownership, the beneficiary must remain continuously employed within Whitmore Logistics in an operational leadership role for a minimum of 15 years. Silence crashed over the room. Marcus stared at him, stunned. That's ridiculous, he said. Why would there be a condition like that? I met his gaze calmly. Because I said softly, I built that company to last beyond my lifetime, not to be dismantled for quick profit. Lila's voice cut in sharp and cold. This wasn't in the draft you showed us. Harold's expression remained neutral. It is fully legal and properly documented, he replied. Marcus's face darkened. So if I refuse, he demanded. Harold answered calmly. Then the inheritance transfers immediately to the secondary beneficiary. The room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus swallowed. And who is that? I folded my hands in my lap and looked directly at him. The Whitmore Logistics Employee Trust, I said quietly. Gasps filled the room. Every employee, every worker, every family that depended on the company. They would inherit everything. Marcus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Lila's face went pale, and in that moment, they finally understood. The fortune they believed they had secured was never truly theirs. But what they still didn't know was this. The performance clause was only the first layer of the trap, because the real revelation, the one that would destroy them completely, had not yet been revealed. If you have ever watched someone realize, in real time, that their future has just slipped through their fingers, you will recognize the look Marcus had that night. It was not anger at first. It was disbelief. His eyes moved rapidly between Harold, the documents on the table, and me, as though reality itself had suddenly become unstable. This has to be a mistake, he said, his voice tight. Mom, you wouldn't do this. I held his gaze calmly. I already did. A murmur rippled through the room. Board members shifted in their seats. Patricia sat very still. Her hands folded, her expression unreadable. Marcus stood up abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. You expect me to stay trapped in that company for 15 years, he demanded. 15 years just to access what's already mine. The word mine cut through the air. Not earned, not entrusted. Mine. I felt a quiet sadness settle in my chest. You never understood what that company represents, I said gently. It isn't a prize. It's a responsibility. Lila rose beside him, her composure cracking for the first time. This is manipulation, she said sharply. You're controlling him even after your death. Judge Holloway spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. Mrs. Whitmore's conditions are fully legal, he said. They are designed to ensure continuity of the business. This is not uncommon in estates of this size. Lila's jaw tightened. Marcus looked back at me, desperation beginning to creep into his expression. There must be another way, he said. A modification, a trust release clause, something. I leaned back slowly. There is, I said. Hope flashed instantly in his eyes. What is it? He asked quickly. I let the silence stretch just long enough to feel its weight. Prove you deserve it, I said quietly. He blinked. What does that even mean? It means I continued demonstrating leadership integrity and loyalty to the people whose lives depend on Whitmore Logistics. His expression hardened. You're testing me, he said. No, I replied softly. Life already did that. The room remained frozen in tension. But then, Harold cleared his throat again. There is one additional clause, he said. Marcus turned sharply toward him. What now? Harold opened a separate folder. As part of the inheritance agreement, Mrs. Whitmore has also requested a formal review of the beneficiary's financial and ethical standing, he read. Marcus frowned. That's standard procedure. Yes, Harold said. But this review includes a forensic audit of all personal and corporate financial activities conducted within the past 2 years. The color drained from Marcus's face. Lila's fingers tightened around his sleeve. That's unnecessary, she said quickly. He hasn't done anything wrong. Harold's voice remained steady. Compliance with this audit is mandatory for inheritance eligibility. Marcus swallowed. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. He had assumed his secret transactions were invisible. He had assumed no one was watching. But he had underestimated me, because while he and Lila were busy planning my death, Patricia had been quietly documenting every unauthorized transfer he made from company accounts, every shell investment, every hidden debt, and most importantly, every life insurance policy he took out in my name, without my knowledge. The silence in the room grew heavy. Marcus's breathing became shallow. Lila leaned toward him, whispering urgently, "Stay calm. They can't prove anything." But I saw the truth in his eyes. He knew they could. Because what he still didn't understand was this. The audit was not just about finances. It was the final step before revealing something far more devastating. Something that would not just cost him the inheritance, but shatter the very foundation of his identity. And that revelation was only hours away. After the meeting ended, guests began leaving in subdued silence. No one spoke loudly. No one lingered for small talk. The festive atmosphere had dissolved completely, replaced by a thick tension that clung to every corner of the mansion. Marcus and Lila remained in the dining room long after everyone else had gone. I watched them from the hallway, unseen. Lila paced back and forth, her voice low but sharp. "This is a disaster," she hissed. "She planned this." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "We can still fix it," he muttered. "We just need to manage the audit." "Manage," she snapped. "You mean hide everything before they find it?" He didn't answer, and his silence told me everything. Lila stopped pacing and grabbed his arm. "Listen to me," she said urgently. "If that audit goes through, we lose everything." Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. "Not everything." She stared at him. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then said the words that made her eyes widen in shock. "There's another insurance policy," he admitted, "a much larger one." Her voice trembled slightly. "How large?" 15 million, he said quietly. Even from the hallway, I felt the air leave the room. "And when does it pay out?" she asked. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Only if she dies before the end of the fiscal year." Silence fell between them, like a falling curtain. Lila's expression changed slowly, something dark settling into her eyes. "That's only 3 weeks away," she said softly. Marcus nodded. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Lila whispered the words that confirmed everything. "Then we can't wait anymore." My heart pounded, but I remained perfectly still, because now the truth was undeniable. They were no longer just waiting for me to die. They were preparing to make it happen. Soon, very soon. Marcus sank into a chair, his voice shaking. "It's too risky," he said. "After tonight, there are too many eyes on us." Lila leaned down close to him, her voice icy. "You already started this," she said. "You don't get to panic now." He looked up at her, fear finally visible. "What if we get caught?" Her lips curved into a cold smile. "Then we don't get caught," she said simply. The calm certainty in her tone sent a chill through me. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Lila was no longer following Marcus's plan. She was leading it, and she was far more dangerous than he was. I stepped back quietly and returned to my room, closing the door softly behind me. Then I picked up my phone and called Patricia. "They're escalating," I said. She didn't ask how I knew. Understood, she replied. The next phase is ready whenever you are. I sat down slowly, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. Because now, everything was clear. They believed they were racing against time. They believed they had only weeks left to secure their fortune. What they didn't know was this: time was no longer working for them. It was working for me. And in less than 48 hours, they would discover a hidden truth so devastating that even prison would feel like mercy compared to what was coming next. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, I felt completely steady. My mind was clear, my body strong, my breathing calm. It was an unfamiliar sensation after so many weeks of pretending to be fragile. But clarity does something dangerous. It forces you to confront the emotional truth you have been postponing. As I sat at my bedroom window, watching the winter light slowly spill across the estate grounds, a single thought rose quietly inside me. How did my little boy become capable of this? I remembered Marcus, at 5 years old, running across this very lawn with a toy airplane in his hand, shouting that he was going to be a pilot someday. I remembered him crying the night his father died, clinging to me and whispering, "You're all I have." And I had believed him. I had given him everything, every opportunity, every safety net, every ounce of trust. Somewhere along the way, love had turned into entitlement, and entitlement had turned into greed. That realization hurt more than the poisoning ever did. But pain, I had learned, can either weaken you or sharpen you. And by now, mine had become a blade. At 9 that morning, Patricia arrived at the mansion. She carried a slim folder and the same calm, focused expression she always wore during corporate crises. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. She placed the folder on my desk and opened it. Inside were printed copies of financial records, bank transfers, insurance contracts, and surveillance stills from the hidden camera in my room. All organized, all time-stamped, all undeniable. "The forensic audit is complete," she said. "Marcus has been diverting company funds into shell accounts for over a year." I nodded slowly. "And the insurance policies?" "Confirmed," she replied. "There are 3. The largest pays out $15 million if you die before the end of this fiscal quarter." My hands remained steady, but my chest tightened. $15 million. That was the price my own son had placed on my life. Patricia hesitated before speaking again. "There's one more thing," she said. I looked up. The DNA test results came back this morning. For a moment, the room seemed to go silent, because this was the final piece. The hidden truth I had kept buried for decades. The secret that would change everything Marcus believed about his inheritance. I exhaled slowly. "What do they show?" I asked. Patricia met my eyes gently. "They confirm what you suspected." I closed my eyes briefly. Even though I had prepared for this moment, hearing it still felt like something inside me was quietly breaking. Marcus Whitmore was not Daniel's biological son, and more importantly, he was not legally entitled to the Whitmore family estate. The truth went back 43 years, back to a brief separation during my marriage when Daniel and I had been on the verge of divorce, back to a single mistake I had buried out of fear and guilt. Daniel had known. He had chosen to forgive me, and he had chosen to raise Marcus as his own. But he had also quietly amended his original estate framework. If Marcus ever acted against the interests of the family or company, his legal claim to the inheritance could be revoked. I had never imagined that clause would one day save my life. I opened my eyes again. "Is everything ready?" I asked. Patricia nodded. "Yes. The judge has reviewed the documentation. Law enforcement is prepared. All we need now is the right moment." I leaned back in my chair. "That moment," I said quietly, "is tonight." Because Marcus and Lila believed they still had time. They believed their biggest obstacle was the financial audit. What they didn't know was this: by nightfall, they wouldn't just lose the inheritance. They would lose the identity they had built their entire lives around. And once that truth came out, there would be no way back. That evening, I invited Marcus and Lila to join me in the library. I kept my tone gentle, almost affectionate. There are a few final matters we need to discuss privately, I told them. Marcus looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night. Lila, on the other hand, appeared tense, but controlled her posture rigid, with forced calm. They both sat across from me as I settled into Daniel's old leather chair. For a moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the antique grandfather clock filled the silence. Then Marcus broke first. "Mom," he said, his voice strained, "we need to talk about the audit. There must be some misunderstanding." I folded my hands. "There isn't," I replied quietly. His face tightened. Lila leaned forward, her tone smooth but urgent. "We can resolve this as a family," she said. "There's no need to involve outsiders." I studied her carefully. Even now, she was trying to control the narrative, trying to frame this as a negotiation. She still believed she had leverage. "You're right," I said softly. "This is a family matter." Relief flickered briefly across Marcus's face, until I added, "And that's why you both deserve to know the truth." Something in my tone made him stiffen. "What truth?" he asked. I reached slowly into the drawer beside me and removed a sealed envelope. Inside were 2 documents, the DNA test results and Daniel's original estate clause. I placed them on the table between us. Marcus frowned. "What is this?" I met his eyes steadily. "Your inheritance," I said, "was never unconditional." Confusion crossed his face as he opened the envelope. He read the first page, then the second. The color drained from his skin so quickly, it looked as though the life itself had been pulled out of him. This isn't real," he whispered. Lila grabbed the documents from his shaking hands. Her eyes moved rapidly across the pages. Then she looked up at me, stunned. "You're lying," she said hoarsely. I shook my head slowly. "No," I replied. "I've been silent. There's a difference." Marcus's voice trembled. "So, you're saying—" He swallowed hard. "You're saying I'm not Dad's son." The word Dad broke in his throat. Tears filled his eyes, and for a brief moment, I saw the little boy he once was. "Yes," I said quietly. "Daniel chose to raise you. He chose to love you. But legally, the inheritance was always conditional." The room seemed to collapse inward. Marcus stared at the floor, his breathing uneven. Lila's face had gone completely pale. "Then the estate," she whispered. "Cannot pass to you," I said calmly. Silence stretched, heavy, crushing. Everything they had done, every scheme, every act of betrayal, every attempt to poison me, all of it had been for an inheritance that was never truly theirs to claim. And they had destroyed themselves trying to take it. Marcus finally looked up, his voice barely audible. "What happens now?" I leaned back slowly, and for the first time, there was no anger left inside me, only clarity. "Now," I said quietly, "we let justice finish what you started." Because outside the library doors, waiting silently in the hallway, were the people who had come to make sure that justice would not be delayed any longer. There is a moment, just before everything collapses, when the truth finally settles into the room, like a physical presence. It is heavy, it is unavoidable, and it leaves no space left for denial. Marcus sat frozen across from me, the DNA report trembling in his hands. His eyes moved again and again over the same lines, as if rereading them might somehow change the outcome. Lila stood beside him, but for the first time since I had known her, she had nothing to say. No arguments, no manipulation, no carefully crafted words, only silence. "I don't understand," Marcus whispered, at last, his voice hollow. You knew this all these years." "Yes," I said gently. "And you never told me." I took a slow breath. "Because it never mattered," I replied. "You were Daniel's son in every way that counted. He loved you. He raised you. He trusted that you would carry forward what we built." Marcus let out a broken laugh. Trusted, he repeated bitterly. The word hung between us like a shattered promise. Lila finally found her voice. This changes nothing, she said sharply, forcing strength back into her tone. He was legally recognized. He still has rights. I shook my head slowly. Not under Daniel's estate provisions, I said. And not after the evidence of financial misconduct and attempted murder. Her eyes widened. Marcus looked up sharply. Murder, he choked. I held his gaze. Yes, I said quietly. There is no longer any need to pretend. I reached toward the side table and pressed a small button. The library doors opened immediately. 2 detectives stepped inside, followed by Harold Benton and Judge Holloway. The shift in the room was instant. Reality had arrived. Marcus's face drained completely of color. No, he whispered. Lila stepped backward, panic flashing across her features. This is insane, she snapped. You can't prove anything. One of the detectives spoke calmly. We have video evidence of arsenic being administered repeatedly, he said. We also have financial records showing motive and insurance documentation. Marcus's breathing became shallow and rapid. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Not anger, not entitlement. Fear, real, overwhelming fear. Mom, he whispered, please, you don't have to do this. The word mom cut deeper than anything else he had said. For a moment, time seemed to fold back on itself. I saw him as a toddler, reaching for my hand, as a teenager, asking for advice, as a young man promising he would take care of me when I grew old. And then I saw the videos again, the poison in the tea, the insurance policies, the quiet conversations about how long I had left to live. My heart did not harden. It simply became still. You did this, I said softly. Not me. The detective stepped forward. Lila tried to move toward the door, but one of them blocked her path. Marcus didn't resist when they took his hands. He just stared at me. And in that final moment, before they led him away, he asked one last question. Was any of it real? He whispered. Did you ever truly love me? Tears stung my eyes, but my voice remained steady. More than you will ever understand, I said. And that I added quietly is why this hurts. They were escorted out in silence. The heavy library doors closed behind them with a soft final sound. And just like that, the betrayal that had nearly ended my life was finally over. But justice, I had learned, does not bring triumph. It brings something far more complicated. It brings release and the quiet, painful beginning of healing. The mansion felt very different after they were gone. For weeks, every room had been filled with tension-hidden agendas and the constant weight of suspicion. Now, the silence that remained was calm rather than threatening. It felt like breathing again after being underwater for far too long. The legal process moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, financial trails, and insurance documentation left little room for defense. Marcus eventually accepted a plea agreement that ensured a long prison sentence. Lila fought harder, but the footage of her administering poison sealed her fate. In the end, justice was not dramatic. It was procedural, quiet, final, and strangely anticlimactic. What remained afterward was not anger, it was grief. Because no matter how much betrayal had occurred, I had still lost my son. Not to death, but to his own choices. That loss lingered in unexpected ways. In the empty chair at the dining table, in the untouched ornaments he had made as a child, in the silence of holidays that would never feel the same again. But life, like justice, does not stop moving. 3 months later, Whitmore Logistics officially transitioned into the employee trust. Patricia became the new chief executive officer, chosen unanimously by the board. The company stabilized. Jobs were protected. Growth resumed. For the first time in decades, I no longer carried the burden of leadership alone. Instead, I watched from a distance as something we had built together continued to thrive without the shadow of greed hanging over it. One spring afternoon, I walked through the company's main warehouse. Employees greeted me warmly, their smiles genuine, their gratitude heartfelt. A young woman approached me shyly. "My mother worked here for 20 years, she said. "You saved her job when the company nearly closed. Because of you, our family survived." Her words settled deeply inside me, and I realized something important. The true inheritance I had protected was never about money. It was about people. It was about the lives connected to the choices we make. That evening, I returned to the mansion and sat in the sunroom where this story had quietly begun. The light streamed through the windows, just as it had months earlier. But this time, the air felt clear, peaceful. I picked up a cup of tea, and for the first time in a long while, I drank it without fear. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted deeply, if you have ever wondered whether justice truly exists, let me tell you this: karma does not always arrive quickly. But when it does, it arrives completely. It does not just take away what was stolen. It reveals the truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, is always the beginning of freedom. So if this story resonated with you, if you believe that justice matters, that betrayal has consequences, and that strength can be found even after the deepest wounds, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Because every story we tell here is a reminder of one simple truth. No matter how dark betrayal becomes, the light of truth always finds a way back.